Good evening. Tonight we're going to start with lesson 37 in our fractions. I can find the product of a whole number and a mixed number using the distributive property. Now, we have used the distributive property before. This is nothing new. We've used this plenty of times before. And now we're going to bring it back and demonstrate it using it, but using it now with our fractions. So, for example, if we want to see a problem like this, 3 times 4.5, and we use the distributive property, we are going to be taking this 3 and saying 3 copies of 4 and 3 copies of a half. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like this: 3 times 4 plus 3 copies of the half, and then we just multiply them. 12 plus 3 halves, and then we're going to have to take 3 halves and simplify that into a mixed number. So we've got 12 plus 1, has 1 whole in there and it has a half left over, and now we're left with 13 and a half. So that's basically what we're going to do. Remember what I used to call it funnel style? Well, that's basically what we're going to be doing this evening with lesson 37. So let's get started on this. All right, so what I did at the top is I drew a tape diagram to show 2 different ways to represent 3 units of 5.5. So that means, like, again, when we hear that word of, we know multiplication. So I have 3 copies of 5 and I have 3 copies of a half. So I just demonstrated with this type diagram. I put a 5 here next to a half, a 5 over here next to a half, a 5 and then a half. Or I could do another tape diagram that shows 3 copies of just 5 and then 3 copies of just 1/12. So then down here it's asking you to write an expression about this tape diagram and then also this one. So how is this first one going to look is just basically we've got 3 times 5 and 1/12. You see how we did this is because I have a 5 and 1/12 together, a 5 and 1/12 together, and a 5 and 1/12 together. And I have 3 of those, and that's why we have 3 times 5 and 1/12. But how would this look? Because the 5s are separate than the half, excuse me, I keep saying half, than the 12s. And I just noticed that I made a mistake up here. Let me just fix that. That's why I keep saying a half. Okay, so 1/12. So now what I want to do is I want to write a multiplication expression to represent that. And how that would look would be like this. 3 times 5, because I have 3 copies of 5. This shows me 3 copies of 5. 1, 2, 3. And then how many copies of 1/12? 1, 2, 3. So I would add on 3 copies of 1/12. So I just wrote 2 different types of multiplication expressions to represent this tape diagram, and this one matches that tape diagram. All right, so we have 3 times 6 and 4/5. We're going to be using the distributive property to solve this problem. So we're going to take that 3 and we're going to take that 6 because we have 3 copies of 6. So I'm going to make my parentheses, 3 times 6, and I have 3 copies of the 4/5. And now I can solve it. 3 times 6 is 18, plus 3 times 4 over 5, that would be 12/5. But I cannot leave 12/5 as a improper fraction or a fraction greater than 1. I have to simplify that into a mixed number. So let's continue. 18 plus, there was 2 wholes in that, and 2/5 left over. And if I add up both of these, 18 plus 2 is 20, and the fraction, 22/5. Nice little funnel. All right, our next one is 5 times 4 and 1/6. So we're going to be using the distributive property to solve for this. So let's take our parentheses and we do 5 times 4. We have 5 copies of 4 plus we have 5 copies of 1/6. So in the first set of parentheses, 5 times 4 is 20 plus 5 times 1/6 is 5/6. And continue. 20 plus 5/6 becomes 20 and 5/6. All right, in this problem, they use the commutative property to move those numbers around. So we could even use that property to move it back to where we're comfortable in using it. So I'm going to move back to 12 here times the 3 and the 3/8. All right, and now we can use the distributive property. So that means I've got 12 copies of 3 plus 12 copies of 3/8. Well, 12 times 3 is 36 plus, well, we know what 12 times 3 is again because we just did it, 36, so it's 36 over 8. Okay, but we cannot leave 36/8 we can't leave that alone. We have to simplify that and we have to make that into a mixed number. So somewhere on the side, we want to pull out, let's put 36/8 over here. And we want to pull out those holes. How many holes do we have? 36. Well, 8 times what gives us close to 36? Well, that would be 4. And we've got 4/8 left over. So it becomes, and again, 4/8 needs to be simplified. The biggest factor it shares is 4. And this becomes 4.5. So we do 36 plus 4.5 becomes 36 plus 4 is 40. And then we just bring down our fraction. Becomes 40.5. All right, so guys, this is important right over here. We want to make sure that we are simplifying our improper fractions or our fractions greater than 1 into mixed numbers. And be sure that we are always reducing our answers. Kelly's new puppy weighed 4 7/10 pounds when she brought him home. Now he weighs 6 times as much. How much does he weigh now? All right, so let's look over this. We have to always look over our word problems very carefully. So weighs 4 7/10 pounds. And then 6 times as much. So how much does he weigh now? So we are going to set this up with he weighs 6 times as much. So we're going to put 6 times 4 7/10. So that means we have 6 copies of 4. We have 6 copies of 7/10. All right, and now we can start solving. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 6 times 7 is 42 over 10. All right, now we cannot leave 42/10 in there, so we have to make that into a mixed number. So how many holes do we have in 42/10? Well, 10 times what gives us close to 42? And that is going to be 4 holes, because 4 times 10 is 40, and we've got 2/10 left over. And let's continue. 24 plus 4 is 28. So we have 28 and 2/10. But I am not going to leave 2/10 there because 2/10 can be simplified. The factor they share is dividing the top by 2. So we get 28 and 1/5. Stay on target, guys. Do the best you can on the next set of problems. First problem, use the distributive property to solve 6 times 2 3/5. And I want to see your work tomorrow. Next one, use the distributive property for 8 times 7 1/4. And I want to see your work tomorrow. And your last one. Sarah's street is 2 3/10 miles long. She ran the length of the street 6 times. How far did she run? Use the distributive property to solve for this word problem. Try to see if you want to do the read, draw, and write method also to help you solve it. And, of course, I want to see your work tomorrow. In every aspect of life, have a game plan and do your best to achieve it. Have a wonderful night, guys.